Whether it be carnivore diet or veganism or vegetarian or paleo, on all the social media platforms there's all these debates about what diet is the best. I'm pretty balanced about this. I think each of them just has their own unique set of upsides and downsides, and I think the main issue is a lot of these require a bit of knowledge to make the diet actually work. It seems as though everyone just stumbles upon the diet naturally that works best for them, and then because it works for them they just assume it's categorically the best diet and try it impose it on others. So yeah, that's why I'm here. As I said, any diet can work if you just have that amount of knowledge, but the issue is if you go into it blindly and don't really know what you're doing, you might run into issues, which is why this video is going to be covering some of the issues you might run into if you are trying to do a vegan diet. And I guess for those of you who aren't vegan but maybe have vegan friends in your life, maybe just help them out, because a lot of the time they probably don't know what they're doing. So any diet that excludes food groups like vegan is going to be a bit of an issue if you don't know what you're doing, because if you're not eating the well-rounded diet that someone omnivorous might be, you might be running into certain deficiencies because you're excluding certain food groups. Let's get into the first point, which is deficiencies. Now, everyone knows that vegan foods are going to be low in things like B12, because those things are literally only in animal products. But nowadays it's very easy to get things that are fortified, which just means it's, if you say milk and they fortify it by just adding additional micronutrients to it, you can get this pretty easily now with B12, which is good, because otherwise being vegan would just leave you deficient immediately. So that's nice, but there are other issues, okay? B12 is the one everyone talks about, but there are iron, calcium, vitamin D issues as well. I'll talk about vitamin D and calcium together because they do go together. Bone health is not only calcium, okay? It is also vitamin D. If we're not getting enough vitamin D, it makes it harder to absorb adequate calcium from our foods, which leads to, of course, less calcium in our body, and we need a certain blood concentration of calcium, which means if we're not getting enough, it's just ripping it out of our bones to keep that fine bandwidth of calcium in our blood. Additionally, vitamin D will actually just keep that that calcium in the bones, and instead try and just get more of it from our food through increasing absorption. And it can be really problematic actually for particularly females who are of the younger age group. I think there's a lot of vegans in this demographic, because if you don't build up that peak bone mass, peak bone density in an early age, you are much more prone to develop conditions like osteoarthritis later in life. It's kind of from peak bone mass early on in life at around 20 years old, it's kind of just a steady decline all the way down. So if you fail to set that high enough, you're going to reach these conditions earlier, which is, you know, it's not talked about enough, because those can be really impactful on your quality of life later on if we don't be careful. Now, it is quite hard to get vitamin D out of a vegan diet, but in general it's hard to get vitamin D from food. It's just a lot easier to get it from the sun. Usually most foods are not going to get you there unless you're just eating a lot of, say, salmon, but that's not many people. So you're pretty reliant on the sun. And as far as calcium goes, again, you can get fortified things like you would with vitamin B12. And the last point I wanted to talk about here is iron. And this is a big one because although vegetables such as spinach can actually be way higher in total iron per, say, 100 grams than maybe some even meats, the issue is that the bioavailability varies so much, and it is just way higher in animal products. And bioavailability, if you didn't mean, is the proportion of, say, iron that we actually uptake from our food. Say if there's 10 milligrams, we uptake actually 1 milligram in the food, that's just 10% bioavailability, right? And this is for a few reasons. For one, a lot of vegetables have phytates, which are inhibitors to iron intake, and additionally, meats have what's called the meat, fish, and poultry cofactor, which we actually don't know much about, except the fact that it will increase iron and a few other things uptake in your diet. Even though you're on paper might be eating more iron, technically you're not getting much of it. Like, I eat a lot of spinach, like 2 kilos a week, and my iron levels are normal. They're not stupid high, because you don't get that much from it. And this is increasingly important for females, because I think females outnumber vegan men by like 3 to 1, and females actually have a higher iron target compared to men, which is interesting given that women on average are going to eat less food than men. So as far as the proportion wise, they need to eat a much more iron rich diet, and otherwise, you know, you're going to run into low energy levels and, you know, a whole lot of issues. Anemia is kind of the main one you want to be worried about, because we need iron to make the red blood cells, and if we don't have the red blood cells, then we're just, we're running low on energy. We can't carry enough oxygen. So that kind of wraps up all the things I wanted to talk about as far as micronutrients go. I think everyone says, okay, B12, iron, and they don't really go into too much depth, which is problematic because I don't really think it helps people if they don't actually know why they need these things and the pitfalls they can fall into. So hopefully that was clear enough to understand. Now, the next issue is kind of twofold. It's weight adjustment, and this can be problematic for vegans going up or down in weight, as in aiming for a high or a low calorie target. I'll start with weight loss. Of course, if you want a lower calorie target, it's very, very important that you have adequate protein intake. For one, this is going to increase satiety and just make it easier to adapt and not be too hungry on the lower calorie diet. But more importantly, we need the protein to actually hold on to our muscle tissue. You want to be aiming upwards of probably like 1.6 to even 2.0 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight. And if we don't get this, then our body is going to pull a lot of energy out of the protein that's stored in our muscle, and we're just going to call this muscle atrophy. And you're going to be losing a chunk of fat, but also some muscle, which really isn't ideal. You want to hold on to as much muscle tissue as possible, which is going to be hard with low protein, of course. And the issue here with veganism is there aren't any like very, very pure protein sources unless you go for some vegan protein powders, but the thing is, every high protein source that is for vegans is usually, it usually has a lot of either carbs or fat tied onto it, which is fine. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with high fat or high carb, but it just makes it very hard to hit your high protein target without overstepping the mark as far as calorie total. For example, if you were to eat, say, some chicken breast or some tuna, that's going to be mostly protein, and the protein concentration per total calories in the food is just way higher. Whereas if you get all your protein from lentils or chickpeas or some other legume, you're also going to be taking a lot of carbs in and a little bit of fat too, which is going to make it a lot more high calorie per gram of protein, if that makes sense. So that makes it hard to lose weight. And as far as gaining weight, it's less of an issue, but still a consideration. Okay, the main thing is fiber. A lot of vegan foods are fiber based, a lot of vegetables and lentils, legumes, that entails lentils. Unless you're dipping heavily into high processed foods, you're probably going to have to rely on oils to reach a high calorie target, because if you're eating high fiber, you're going to be very well satiated, and it's going to be hard to continue eating past what you would normally eat to reach the high calorie target if you are trying to gain weight and put on muscle. And relying on oils like coconut oil or olive oil, completely fine, but I'm just thinking it's not ideal for everyone. I don't mind my food a bit oily, which makes it a bit easier if I'm trying to bulk up a little bit, but I understand that not everyone wants their food oily. I think out of the two, the main issue is the weight loss issues with trying to get enough protein in without overstepping the mark as far as calories go. I think weight gain can definitely be worked around, but I thought it was worth mentioning as well. Now, in this last section, I'm just going to cover protein completeness. Now, you may have heard before that certain amino acids, which are the blocks of which protein is made up of, some of which fall into the category of essential and inessential. Now, there's also conditionally essential, which generally are non-essential outside of certain cases, which kind of where it gets the name conditionally, certain conditions, right? So basically, every time we are repairing, say, a muscle after training, we need all of the amino acids to actually build that back up. So if we're missing one, things just get limited entirely. If you study chemistry, it's the same as like a limiting reagent. If we don't have that one thing, we're limited by that one limitation, and it holds everything else back. And essential amino acids we need to get from our diet. We can't make them ourselves, whereas non-essentials we can, or we can just make them from other amino acids, so we don't really have to worry about them too much. The issue is plant sources generally aren't complete proteins. There's only a few plant-based sources that are complete, like quinoa or soybeans or flax seeds, but generally all of the other plant proteins are missing, one or two or even three of the 9 essential amino acids, which is problematic because then we're stuck. No matter how high protein it is, if we're missing that one thing, we're stuck. Now, does this mean it's harder to make progress if you're vegan? Absolutely not. The workaround you have to be aware of is the fact that you can kind of blend things together and make up for the weakness. I'm gonna grab the whiteboard. So a pretty common combination that people will do is rice and beans, coincidentally. So basically, if this is lysine and this is methionine, you'll see that rice is low in lysine, but high in methionine, and beans is the opposite. So if you eat either one of these, you're gonna be limited if you just eat one of them, but if you combine the two, we're getting enough lysine and methionine, which means we can recover adequately. Now, I think this kind of explains the big barrier to entry that I alluded to earlier. It's just, there's a lot of knowledge you need if you want to conduct this reasonably well, and you need to be aware of, you know, what you're actually putting in and whether or not these amino acids are complementing each other, because otherwise you're going to be limited. But yeah, those are the main three things from a nutritional stance that it might be an issue as far as veganism goes. But, you know, if you can apply all these things and ethically you align with it, you know, more power to you. I think if you apply these things and actually do it properly, I'm sure you'll see adequate results. Most of these, you know, plant source foods are very micronutrient dense, and if you can work around the protein issues, then, you know, it's probably going to be a better diet than most people. So there's that to consider. But probably the easiest way to overcome some of these knowledge barriers is just to put your current diet into Cronometer. This is going to outline some of the micronutrients, such as the iron and the calcium that you might be low on. And it'll also show you the essential aminos and which ones you might be lower on. It's really important you get adequate leucine, because that's one of the main drivers as far as driving muscle protein synthesis, and it can be a little bit harder to get in plants compared to animal sources, so there's that to consider as well. But yeah, throw it in Cronometer if you are vegan or trying to, you know, support, you know, a vegan in your life, which is fair enough. You know, you don't have to hate on them just because you don't agree with their diet. I really try not to hate on any specific diet, rather just provide the evidence and, you know, say, if you want to do this diet, you know, here's how you do it. But that's the video for today, and if you enjoyed, then drop a like and subscribe. That'd be lovely, and I'll see you next time.